Why I exercise caution when criticising Islam. There is an accusation often levelled at white middle-class atheists, such as myself, that we seem to have no problem expressing criticism of Christianity, but won't dare criticise Islam for fear of being labelled Islamophobic. In my experience, this accusation usually either comes from Christians who are perhaps annoyed that their religion is taking all the anti-theistic flack, or from right-of-centre atheists who seem to believe we are compromising our criticism of religion in favour of conforming to some sort of supposed left-of-centre ideal. First of all, I will admit that I do share some of these misgivings. Islam should not be immune from criticism, and in my case at least, it isn't. I have done videos that are critical of Islam in the past. However, I tend to exercise a greater level of caution when making such criticisms, and I should like to explain why. The hypersensitivity surrounding Islam exists for a reason, because Islamophobia exists. Let us be clear as to what Islamophobia is, and perhaps more importantly, what it isn't. Islamophobia refers to an irrational fear of Islam. It does not refer to any and all criticisms of Islam. My attention was recently drawn to an article by Futile Democracy, tweeted by Richard Dawkins, entitled "The Cry of Islamophobia and the Right to Blaspheme." The article opens with a quote from Abdur Rahman Mohammed, Muslim ex-cleric. Quote, "This loathsome term, Islamophobia, is nothing more than a thought-terminating cliché conceived in the bowels of Muslim think tanks for the purpose of beating down critics." End quote. Obviously, I don't agree with this. To the best of my knowledge, the term Islamophobia was originally coined by the Runnymede Trust, a left-wing think tank, not a Muslim one. If you want to argue that said think tank is covertly being controlled by some sort of hidden Muslim organisation, well, like all conspiracy theorists, you need to provide some evidence of your claims before you can expect to be taken seriously by anyone rational. If you believe such a thing without evidence, and if you are afraid of Islam as a result, then congratulations, you have an irrational fear of Islam, and are therefore an Islamophobe. Futile Democracy also notes in his article that when Richard Dawkins mocked Mitt Romney for being a Mormon, or when Matt Stone and Trey Parker made the musical The Book of Mormon, mocking the Church of Latter-day Saints, there were no cries of Mormonophobia. This, of course, ignores the fact that there is a difference between being afraid of something and mocking it, and shows something of an ignorance as to how different religions play different roles politically and socially in the world. When was the last time you saw a bunch of angry, non-Mormon protesters marching through an area with a high Mormon population demanding that they change their way of life or leave the country? Do you hear British Mormons being told they should bugger off back to Utah, even though they aren't from there in the first place? To imply that all religions, and more importantly followers of religions, are regarded in the same manner as each other is highly facile. In the same article, Futile Democracy writes, quote, "The word Islamophobia is seeped in hypocrisy and inconsistency. It is a way to discourage free inquiry of ideas, to accept without question that this particular idea is off limits with regard criticism of any form. To suggest otherwise gets us to the rather peculiar point in which even a cartoon of the Prophet is Islamophobic." End quote. This brings us neatly to Draw the Prophet Muhammad Day. When it was brought to Thunderfoot's attention that his video promoting Draw the Prophet Muhammad Day was being shared on websites such as Stormfront, he not only wasn't bothered about it, but described Stormfront and other racist groups who may wish to participate in Draw the Prophet Muhammad Day as, quote, "useful idiots," end quote. In a similar vein, Professor Richard Dawkins stated that he's happy to continue sharing Pat Condell's videos on his website and continue to sell a DVD of Pat's first 35 videos, including Welcome to Saudi Britain, in which Condell describes the entire population of Saudi Arabia as being mentally ill. In response to criticism he received for sharing Pat's video, entitled "No Mosque at Ground Zero," in which he, Pat, asserts that Muslims should be denied their secular constitutional rights to build an Islamic community centre, not a mosque, a community centre in which both Muslims and non-Muslims are welcome, at Park 51, not Ground Zero, Dawkins instructed his site admins, quote, "No, please don't remove it. I believe Pat Condell deserves a hearing. He may sound extreme, but that could just reflect the extremes he is fighting against. I don't know the corresponding figures for America, but polls in Britain suggest that an alarmingly high percentage of young British Muslims support the terrorists of 9/11 and 7/7, and some 40% of Muslims want Sharia law introduced into Britain. Disquietingly high percentages supported the death sentence against Salman Rushdie and the threats of violence against the Danish cartoonists. Even moderate Muslim leaders support the principle that apostasy deserves the death penalty, even if they are too nice to carry out the sentence themselves. I think it is well arguable that Islam is the greatest man-made force for evil in the world today. Pat Condell is one of the few with the courage to say so. Before condemning his extremism, at least consider the possibility that it may be justified." End quote. The same could be argued for supporting his extremism, Richard. Also, call me a pedant, but I'm much more a fan of actual numbers than the words alarmingly high percentage and disquietingly high percentages. As for the reference to 40% wanting Sharia in the UK, I shall address that later on. Regardless of whether Richard Dawkins supports Pat Condell's xenophobic ultranationalist political views, and to be fair to him I don't think he does, he, Dawkins, has still provided a platform of promotion for Condell and his views. With this in mind, the likes of Thunderfoot would do well to be careful whether they are using the idiots or the idiots are using them. Regarding the issue of Sharia courts, Sharia courts in the UK operate under Section 1 of the Arbitration Act, and as such they operate within UK law, not separately from it as some people seem to believe. In his article, Futile Democracy asks, perhaps rhetorically, quote, "Is it okay to suggest that a secular UK is no place for horrendously patriarchal Sharia courts? Is it racist to say that punishment for apostasy or blasphemy is unfathomably wrong?" End quote. To address the question of racism, no, it is not racist to believe such punishments are wrong. To address the issue of Sharia courts being patriarchal, I agree. Sharia is patriarchal in nature. However, what is the solution? Closing the UK's doors to Islamic immigration, as groups such as UKIP, the EDL, the BNP, etc. propose, is not going to help women who suffer under Sharia. Were these women forced to live in Islamic theocracies, life would surely be far worse for them. I should make clear here that Futile Democracy considers himself to be left of centre and makes clear in his article that he considers groups such as the EDL to be, quote, dangerous fanatics who undoubtedly do mix their dislike for a faith with racism and nationalism, end quote. While I'm glad that Futile Democracy and I can agree on this point, I fear he is way overestimating the rationality of many Islamophobes. Pat Condell, for example, expresses support for both the EDL and the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. The CEMB makes clear on their website, quote, "Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain unequivocally opposes the far right, including groups like the British National Party, English Defence League and Stop Islamisation of Europe. We fully support the findings of One Law for All reports called Enemies Not Allies, the Far Right, which gives evidence on why opponents of Sharia, apostasy laws and Islamism must also oppose the far right. With Islamism being a far-right movement, they are two sides of the same coin. The far-right and Islamists have similar ideologies, characteristics and aims. Both rely on religion. Both use a language of hate and are extremely xenophobic, misogynistic, homophobic and anti-Semitic. Both rely on indiscriminate violence and terrorism to intimidate the population at large. They are dogmatic and punish free thinkers and dissenters. They use threats and scaremongering to push forward their agenda. Both are vehemently anti-working class and the left. They believe in the superiority of their views and culture and deal harshly with anyone who transgresses. The world they have in mind is equally bleak, segregated, hateful and inhuman." End quote. So despite their making clear that they oppose groups such as the EDL, as well as Islamic extremism, Pat Condell still seems happy to support both the CEMB and the EDL. While Richard Dawkins doesn't make it quite so obvious that he doesn't support the EDL, he has still said that he doesn't. Yet this has not stopped the EDL from retweeting him. This brings us to the very crux of why I exercise caution when criticising Islam. Even when one makes it clear that they do not oppose Islam for nationalistic, xenophobic and paranoid reasons, one can still find oneself yoked in with people who are nationalistic, xenophobic and paranoid. Recently, I saw a very good example of this on Facebook when a friend of mine posted a video of Muslim Patrol, a group of 3 Muslim fundamentalists who earlier this year had been patrolling the streets of London doing things such as confiscating alcohol from non-Muslims on the grounds that they were in a Muslim area. Quote, "I would never be allowed to enforce my view in this way, so why are they allowed? Because it is their religion? So what?" End quote. What my friend seems to have missed here is that Muslim Patrol were jailed on the 6th of December 2013, so his question as to why they are allowed to behave in the way they were is nonsensical. They weren't allowed and have faced the legal consequences for their behaviour. Anyone who believes Muslims are being granted special rights or that Sharia is becoming state law in the UK would do well to make note of this. Despite this error, I don't think there was anything Islamophobic about what my friend posted. However, when we look at some of the replies he received, quote, "They are disgusting creatures. If that's how they want to live, fuck off home. And I'm also loving how only white people can be racist in all this shit. If we said anything back to them or called the police, you know they would play the race card and we would be prosecuted. Makes my blood boil." End quote. Again, this is an example of someone failing to look at the facts before reaching a conclusion, as Muslim Patrol have been imprisoned. If they did play the race card, it obviously didn't work. Quote, "Yep, got about 25 seconds in and want to go fucking knife some of these little cunts. There is no Muslim law in the UK, so fuck off if you don't like it." End quote. In my daily life as someone with an active interest in secularism, I am made consistently aware of atrocities committed in the name of religion, be they terrorism, child abuse, spousal abuse, homophobia, cruelty to animals, etc. And I am made equally aware of some of the proposed solutions to these problems by various atheists and secularists, some of which I believe are sensible, some of which I believe are every bit as atrocious as the religiously motivated acts themselves, such as the aforementioned suggestion of knife violence. But Islamic atrocities are the only atrocities to which I ever hear deportation of the religion's practitioners proposed as a solution. I've never heard it suggested that Catholics be deported to the Vatican every time we hear another horrific tale of paedophile priests, for example. Similarly, my attention was drawn to an article in the Mirror recently with the headline, "Muslim protesters take to London streets to demand shops stop selling alcohol." Unsurprisingly, the article received similar responses. Quote, "What the fuck? Don't tell us what we should do in our own country. If you don't like our way of life, go back home." End quote. Quote, "If you don't want to live by our way of life, please feel free to hop back on a plane. I am not a Muslim and do not want to live by their religion. Won't stop your way of life. Do why try and stop ours? In our own country too. Damn cheek." End quote. The problem here, apart from the grammar, if we look at the article, quote, "According to reports, around 60 men and women handed over warning letters to Muslim-owned businesses in the area. Chowdhury allegedly told the crowd, 'The shops are run by Muslims, and they know they are selling alcohol, and they know the sale and consumption of alcohol is completely prohibited. We cannot live among the non-Muslims and see this evil take place.' End quote. So the retailers being targeted were Muslims. Also, the protesters were led by Anjem Choudhury, a British-born Muslim. This is significant as the outraged commenters are of the opinion that Muslims should go back home. The article also notes that, quote, "Dr. Usama Hassan of the Quilliam Foundation, an anti-extremist think tank, condemned the protests. In Islamic teaching, you shouldn't drink alcohol, but you can't impose Islamic law on other people," he told the East London Advertiser. "This is a democracy. To try and impose Sharia by force, which is their stated aim, is completely stupid and against Islamic teaching." End quote. In the comments section of videos I have done in the past that are critical of Pat Condell, I have received criticism from his supporters. While this is no surprise, what is a surprise is that some of them have been devout Christians. The fact that a person can be both a devout supporter of an aggressively outspoken atheist such as Pat Condell and a devout Christian simultaneously reminds me of the Orwellian concept of doublethink and serves as further evidence that there are people whose fear of Islam is so irrational it can obscure their reason to alarming degrees. In conclusion, I exercise caution when criticising Islam because it is an issue that is complicated and often misunderstood and has a significant number of critics who are irrational, paranoid and others dangerous. To those who see no harm in being yoked in with such people, describing them as useful idiots, I would suggest you be careful that they do not view you the same way. In the near future, I hope to do a video where I voice some legitimate concerns regarding Islam and propose some rational solutions. Thanks for watching.